There is a rock-cut temple in the western Ghats of India, in the village of Ellora in the state of Maharashtra, carved downward out of a single basalt cliff. It is catalogued as Cave 16 in the Ellora complex. Its name is the Kailasa Temple. It is not built. It was excavated from the top down, removing an estimated 200,000 tons of stone, leaving the temple standing free in a pit carved out of the mountain. It is approximately 32 meters tall, roughly 90 meters long and 50 meters wide. It was cut during the reign of the Rashtrakuta king Krishna the First in the second half of the 8th century CE, so roughly 1250 years ago. On its walls, on its ceilings, and on the tiered structure of its vimana, the tower above the sanctum, is encoded a map. Not a map of geography, a map of the afterlife. 7 ascending realms above, 7 descending realms below, and a specific instruction about what happens at the 5th of the upper 7. It is called the Kailasa Temple at Ellora, and what happened when a specific art historian, a specific Sanskrit scholar, and a specific astronomer decided to read the temple not as decoration, not as religious symbolism, but as a technical document, is one of the strangest and most under-discussed stories in the history of Indian archaeology. The Kailasa Temple is not the only site where this map appears. It is only the most visible. The same 7-tier structure is encoded, with variations, in the Brihadiswara Temple at Thanjavur in Tamil Nadu, completed in approximately 1010 CE under the Chola king Rajaraja I. It is encoded in the Lingaraj Temple at Bhubaneswar in Odisha, dating to approximately the 11th century. It is described in text, with more precision than any of these buildings, in a set of Sanskrit documents called the Puranas, a class of literature composed and compiled between roughly the 3rd century BCE and the 10th century CE, though the material they contain claims to be far older. Specifically, the Vishnu Purana in its 2nd book and the Bhagavata Purana in its 5th book describe a system of 7 upper realms and 7 lower realms. The upper 7 are called, in order from lowest to highest, Burloka, Bhuvaloka, Svaloka, Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka. The physical dating of the surviving manuscript copies puts most of them between the 8th and the 12th century CE. But the internal claim of the text is that this cosmology is older than the Vedas, that it was received, not composed. That distinction between received and composed is not the writer of the Purana making a modest disclaimer. It is a specific technical claim, and the 7-realm map is what that claim is describing. Here is the thesis. The conventional reading of the 7 lokas treats them as religious symbolism, as a hierarchy of purity, a metaphor for degrees of enlightenment. A parallel reading, held by a small number of Sanskrit scholars and comparative religionists, holds that the 7 lokas describe something else entirely, something physical, something located, and that at the 5th of the upper 7, Janaloka, the description shifts. In the 4 realms below Janaloka, souls cycle, they return. Below Janaloka, the door to birth and death remains open. From Janaloka upward, the text says, there is no return. This is the specific claim. It has been in the Vishnu Purana since the manuscript was first compiled. It is repeated, in different words but with the same structure, in the Bhagavata Purana. It is encoded, architecturally, in the tiered vimana towers of temples built more than 1,000 years apart, in different regions of India, under different dynasties. And what those temples, and those texts, are describing, if they are describing anything at all beyond metaphor, is the question this video is going to prosecute. If you find that the academic literature on Indian temples and Puranic cosmology has been incomplete, if you suspect there are technical claims in these texts still sitting in libraries waiting for someone to read them as descriptions, rather than as decoration, this channel is for that work. Subscribe only if that is the question you have been looking for. The rest of us continue. The conventional reading of the 7 lokas is well established in academic Indology, and can be summarized briefly. In the mainstream framework, the Sanskrit word loka is translated as world, plane, or region. The 7 upper lokas are understood as a hierarchy of states of being, arranged from the material and embodied at the bottom to the fully liberated and disembodied at the top. Purloka is the earthly world, the plane of ordinary human experience. Bhuvaloka is the atmospheric realm, associated with subtle beings and with the space between earth and the sun. Svaloka is the celestial world, the abode of the devas, often glossed as heaven. Mahaloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, and Satyaloka are progressively finer states, understood in the conventional reading as stages of spiritual attainment achievable through austerity, knowledge, and devotion. The full liberation, moksha, is associated with the highest of these, Satyaloka, the realm of Brahma, from which the soul is understood to attain permanent union with the Absolute and does not return to embodied existence. This reading is the one you will find in Wendy Doniger's translations of the Puranas, in the standard entries of the Encyclopedia of Religion, and in the Oxford Handbook of Hindu Studies. It is the reading taught in every introductory course on Hindu cosmology at any university in the world. Under this reading, the 7 lokas are a religious map of the interior life of the soul. They are metaphors. The temples that encode them are teaching devices, meant to make the metaphor visible in stone. This is the reading. It is fair. It is defensible. It is also, a small but persistent group of scholars have argued, incomplete. The break in this reading came from 3 separate directions converging on the same problem. The first came from Stella Kramrisch, an art historian at the University of Pennsylvania, who between the 1930s and the 1960s produced a 2-volume work called The Hindu Temple, first published in 1946 and reissued repeatedly since. Kramrisch's central argument was that the Hindu temple is not a symbolic structure in the loose sense. It is a technical structure. The temple is designed as a 3-dimensional map of the cosmos, with specific numerical proportions, specific alignments, and a specific encoding of the 7-tier system in the vimana, the tower above the sanctum. Kramrisch documented that the number of tiers, the ratios between them, and the placement of specific deities and symbols on each tier were not arbitrary. They followed a template. The template is described in a class of Sanskrit texts called the Vastu Shastras and the Shilpa Shastras, literally, the science of architecture and the science of craftsmanship. And what the Vastu Shastras say, the Vimana encodes, is the 7 upper lokas. Kramrisch was not a fringe figure. She was a professor at Penn. She was awarded the Padma Bhushan by the government of India in 1982. Her books are still in print. What she argued was not that the temples symbolized the lokas, she argued that they map them. The distinction is not linguistic, it is technical. The second direction came from Subhash Kak, a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Oklahoma State University, and later at Louisiana State, who between the 1990s and the 2010s produced a series of peer-reviewed papers arguing that the numerical structure of Vedic and Puranic texts encodes astronomical information. Kak's work focused on the Rig Veda, the earliest layer of Sanskrit literature, but he extended the analysis into the Puranic period. His finding was that specific numerical values in the Puranas, the numbers of years assigned to various cosmic cycles, the numbers of realms, the numbers of gates in each realm, are internally consistent in a way that random symbolism would not produce. They form a system. Kak's papers were published in the Journal of the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, in the Indian Journal of History of Science, and in the volume Computing Science in Ancient India. His credentials are not in Sanskrit studies. His credentials are in signal processing and information theory, which is precisely why his reading of Puranic numbers as encoded information rather than as poetic exaggeration is significant. He was not looking at the texts for religious meaning. He was looking at them for structure, and the structure, he argued, is there. The third direction came from a smaller and more contested source. Zecharia Sitchin, in his 1990 book The Lost Realms, extended his Anunnaki thesis into the Indian subcontinent. Sitchin argued that the 7 lokas of the Puranas describe the same cosmology as the 7 levels of the Sumerian underworld, and the 7 Anunnaki hierarchies described in the Enuma Elish and related texts. Sitchin is not a mainstream scholar. He is the author of The 12th Planet, published in 1976, and the Earth Chronicles series that followed. His readings of Sumerian have been contested by Assyriologists, but on the specific point of the parallel between Sumerian and Vedic Puranic cosmology, Sitchin's observation of the numerical correspondence has not been refuted by counter-analysis. The Sumerian sources describe 7, and the Puranic sources describe 7, and the description of the 5th realm in both traditions carries the same specific quality, the door that closes. The pattern interrupt here bears stating plainly. Kramrisch and Kak are not fringe figures. Kramrisch was a professor at a major American research university and a decorated scholar honoured by the Indian government. Kak is a working scientist with hundreds of peer-reviewed publications in signal processing and information theory. Their argument, taken together with the specific text of the Vishnu Purana and the specific architecture of the Kailasa Temple, is that the seven-loka system is not decoration. It is a description. It is a description that has been read as decoration by modern scholars trained in a hermeneutic that treats non-European religious texts as symbolic by default. That reading is a scholarly choice. It is not a finding. What it means, if the finding is substantially correct, is the following. The Puranas describe 7 upper realms above the earth. The lowest, Purloka, is the earth itself, the ordinary physical world. The Sanskrit word bur is cognate with the Latin fur and the English bear, in the sense of that which bears or supports. Burloka is the platform on which embodied life takes place. Above Burloka is Bhuvaloka, the atmospheric realm. In the conventional reading, Bhuvaloka is the space between the earth and the sun, the atmosphere more or less extended outward. In the technical reading defended by Kramrish and Kak, Bhuvaloka is described more precisely. The Vishnu Purana specifies that Bhuvaloka extends from the surface of the earth to the region of the sun, and that it contains the Pitas, the ancestors. The word Pita means father, in the sense of a lineage ancestor. In the Puranic map, the ancestors do not reside in a spiritual heaven. They reside in a specific band of space between the earth and the sun. Above Bhuvaloka is Svaloka, which the text places from the region of the sun to the region of the pole star Dhruva. This is a bounded region with named upper and lower limits. The Vishnu Purana names both boundaries. The measurements it gives, if taken literally, are in yojanas, a Sanskrit unit of distance that has been variously estimated at between 9 and 15 kilometers, though the precise value is contested. The Bhagavata Purana, in its 5th book, gives specific yojana distances between the 7 realms. Whether the yojana values in the Puranas correspond to any physical measurement is one of the questions Kak's work attempts to prosecute. Above Svaloka is Mahaloka. The Vishnu Purana says this is the realm where great sages dwell, and where, at the end of a cosmic cycle, the sages retreat when the lower 3 realms are dissolved. This is the first realm that survives the periodic dissolution of the cosmos, according to the text. Below Mahaloka, the world is remade at every cycle. From Mahaloka upward, the realm persists. This is a specific structural claim about the persistence of certain regions of the cosmos across cycles. It is stated explicitly in the text. It is not metaphor added later. It is the description as given. And then comes Janaloka, the 5th of the 7, and this is where the text makes its specific and startling claim. The Vishnu Purana states that Janaloka is the realm of the mind-born sons of Brahma, the Manasaputras, being said to have been generated by thought rather than by physical procreation. In the Puranic system, the Manasaputras include the 7 sages, the Sapta Rishis, who are said to have received the Vedas and to have transmitted them to humanity. Janaloka is where these figures reside. The specific claim, made in Vishnu Purana Book 2, Chapter 7, is that souls who reach Janaloka do not return to the cycle of birth and death in the way souls in the lower 4 realms do. In the lower 4 realms, Purloka, Bhuvaloka, Svaloka and Mahaloka, souls are described as cycling. They live, they die, they are reborn in one of the lower realms or in a different tier of the same realm, based on their accumulated actions. This is the standard doctrine of karma and rebirth. What the text says at Janaloka is different. At Janaloka the cycle closes. The soul that reaches Janaloka does not come back. Above Janaloka the same is said of Tapaloka and Satyaloka, but it is at Janaloka that the door first closes. It is at the 5th realm that the point of no return is reached. If you want to check this, the Vishnu Purana has been translated into English multiple times. The most widely cited English translation is by Horace Hayman Wilson, published between 1840 and 1864 in 6 volumes, and republished repeatedly since. The specific passage on Janaloka is in Book 2, Chapter 7, sections roughly 20 through 30 in most numbering systems. The Bhagavata Purana, in its 5th book, gives an even more detailed version of the same claim. Multiple modern editions and translations exist, including the one produced by the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust and the earlier scholarly translation by J.L. Shastri. The passages are open. The claim is not hidden. What is hidden is the reading of the claim as a description rather than as a metaphor. The specific distances between the realms, as given in the Bhagavata Purana Book 5, are worth stating precisely. From the surface of the earth to the region of the sun, the text specifies 100,000 yojanas. From the sun to the pole star Dhruva, another 100,000 yojanas. Above Dhruva, from Mahaloka to Janaloka, the distance is given as 10 million yojanas. From Janaloka to Tapaloka, another 10 million yojanas. From Tapaloka to Satyaloka, a further 60 million yojanas. The yojana, as noted, is variously estimated between roughly 9 and 15 kilometers, with some scholars proposing a much smaller value for specific Puranic contexts and others a much larger one. If the middle estimate of about 12 kilometers is taken, 100,000 yojanas comes to approximately 1.2 million kilometers, which is not the distance from the Earth to the Sun. The Sun is about 149 million kilometers from the Earth, so the yojana in this passage does not equal 12 kilometers if the text is describing physical distance to the Sun in modern astronomical terms. Either the yojana in cosmological contexts is a much larger unit than the yojana in terrestrial contexts, or the text is not describing the distance to the Sun in the way modern astronomy would measure it, or the numbers are not intended as distances at all in the physical sense. Kak's analysis holds that the numbers, taken as ratios rather than as absolute distances, encode a set of proportional relationships that recur in Indian astronomical texts across several centuries. The Bhagavata Purana numbers are not random, they are internally consistent. Whether they map to any physical reality outside the text is a separate question, and one that mainstream Indology has generally treated as not worth asking. The realms themselves, taken beyond their measurements, have specific properties assigned to them in the text. Purloka contains 7 continents, called Dvipas, arranged as concentric rings separated by oceans of different substances: salt water, sugarcane juice, wine, clarified butter, milk, curd, and fresh water. The specificity of the substances is peculiar. It is the kind of specificity that resists metaphorical reading. Bhuvaloka, above Purloka, contains the ancestors, the Pitas, and also contains various categories of beings: the Yakshas, the Rakshasas, the Pisachas, the Gandharvas. Each category has specific attributes described in the text. The Yakshas are wealth-guarding beings, the Gandharvas are celestial musicians, the Rakshayas are beings of a nocturnal or predatory nature. This is not a metaphorical hierarchy. These are named categories with specific functions and dispositions. Svaloka, the third realm, contains the 33 principal devas, arranged in specific groups: the 12 Adityas, the 11 Rudras, the 8 Vasas, and the 2 Ashvins. These groupings are consistent across the Vedas and the Puranas and are given with numerical precision. Mahaloka, the fourth realm, is described as inhabited by the great sages, Brigu and others, who remain even during the periodic dissolution of the lower 3 worlds. Janaloka, the fifth, is inhabited by the mind-born sons of Brahma. Tapaloka, the sixth, contains beings whose defining quality is tapas, austerity, or heat-generating spiritual practice. Satyaloka, the seventh, is the abode of Brahma himself. Each realm has its inhabitants named. Each realm has its function specified. This is not the structure of a loose metaphor. It is the structure of description. The chain of consequences, if the finding is substantially correct, is this: Indian cosmology as encoded in the Puranas would not be describing the interior life of the soul. It would be describing an actual structure, a stratified series of realms, each with its own inhabitants, its own physical or quasi-physical properties, and a specific dynamical rule about the movement of souls between them. The fifth realm would not be a symbol for a state of enlightenment. It would be a specific location, or a specific type of location, from which return is not possible. This is the same kind of claim that Sitchin and others have made about the Sumerian underworld. The 7 gates of Kure, the region from which even in Nana the Queen of Heaven could not return without leaving a substitute. It is the same kind of claim that Egyptologists like E.R. Wallace Budge documented in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where the deceased passes through gates in the Duat, and at a specific stage, the weighing of the heart, either passes forward and does not return, or is consumed and ceases entirely. 3 different cultures, 3 different traditions, and a strikingly similar structure. 7 regions, a 5th or middle threshold, a point of no return. The Puranic geography does not stop at the 7 upper realms. The Vishnu Purana and the Bhagavata Purana also describe 7 lower realms, the 7 talas or the 7 patalas. These are Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala and Patala, with regional variations in naming. They are not hells in the ordinary sense. The Puranas actually describe them as places of sensory pleasure, in some cases more pleasant than the earthly realm, inhabited by asuras and nagas, the beings sometimes translated as demons and serpents, but more accurately understood as other categories of being. Below the 7 talas are the 28 narakas, which are the actual hells, the places of retribution. What is striking is that the structure is again 7-fold, mirroring the upper 7, and that the specific rule about return operates differently in the lower system. The talas are described as places from which return to the upper realms is possible, though the mechanism is different. The narakas are described as places of finite punishment, after which the soul returns to the cycle. The specific closing of the door structure is unique to the upper 5, 6 and 7, with the 5th as the threshold. If you want to verify this, the Bhagavata Purana Book 5 is the densest text on the subject. Chapters 20 through 26 of that book give a systematic geography: the 7 upper realms, the 7 talas, the 28 narakas, with specific measurements, specific inhabitants, and specific rules about the movement of souls. The text is available in translation in every major research library. It is available for free online through multiple archives. The claim is not obscure. What is obscure is any sustained academic engagement with the possibility that it means what it says. The academic response, when this kind of reading is proposed, has been essentially silence followed by dismissal. This is the point where the pattern that has run through Anunnaki-adjacent scholarship for 50 years repeats itself with almost exact fidelity. When Cramrish published The Hindu Temple in 1946, her thesis that the temple encoded technical rather than merely symbolic content was reviewed within Indology. The reviews acknowledged her extraordinary command of the source material. They then treated the encoding claim as an interesting scholarly framework. What they did not do, what has still not been done in the 80 years since, is systematically test the numerical claims in the Vastu Shastras against the surviving temples to see whether the ratios and proportions are what the text specifies. Cramrish documented that they are. No subsequent study has attempted to falsify her measurements. The response has been to treat her work as a beautiful piece of humanistic scholarship and to move on. When Subhash Kak published his numerical analyses in the 1990s and 2000s, the response from mainstream Indology was similar. His papers were published in respectable venues. They were, in some cases, cited. What did not happen was a systematic engagement with his specific claim, that the numbers in the Vedas and Puranas encode astronomical constants, and that this encoding is unlikely to be coincidental. Kak's work was characterized. It was not refuted. There is a difference. Refutation requires engaging with specific claims, showing that the numerical correspondences he identified are chance, or that the astronomical values he claims to recover are wrong. Characterization requires only saying that the work is speculative, or that it belongs to a nationalist tradition of finding advanced science in ancient texts, or that mainstream Sanskrit scholars have not adopted the framework. The academic response was essentially silence followed by dismissal. The pattern extends further. When alternative readings of the Puranic cosmology have been proposed by scholars outside the mainstream Indology establishment, by David Frawley, an American writer on Vedic studies with degrees in Sanskrit and Vedic astrology, or by N.S. Rajaram, a mathematician who worked on Indian antiquity, or by Michael Cremo, who co-authored the book Forbidden Archaeology. The responses have been variations on the same pattern. The work is characterized as pseudo-scholarship. The specific claims are not addressed. When Cremo's Forbidden Archaeology was published in 1993, the anthropologist Richard Leakey called it complete nonsense. He did not, in that response, address any specific case Cremo documented. The response was characterization. The pattern repeats. There is a further asymmetry that the forensic viewer will notice. When mainstream Indology has been faced with genuine intellectual challenges from within, the challenge posed by the Indus Valley script, which remains undeciphered despite over a century of attempts, or the challenge posed by the dating of the Rig Veda, which is still contested between the roughly 1500 BCE conventional date and various earlier dates argued by different specialists. The response has been engagement. Papers are written, counterpapers are written, the debate is public. When the challenge comes from outside the mainstream, when it comes from an aerospace engineer, or from a computer scientist, or from an art historian who worked on the temples themselves, the response is different. The debate does not happen. The characterization happens, and then silence. The specific charge often made against Kak's work, that it belongs to a nationalist tradition of finding advanced science in ancient Indian texts, is worth examining directly. The charge has some historical basis. There has been, since the 19th century, a strain of Indian intellectual culture that seeks to validate ancient Indian achievements against European narratives of progress. This strain is real. It has produced some claims that are exaggerated and some that are false. The problem with using the strain as a blanket dismissal of specific technical work is that it substitutes a social judgment about the work's ideological company for an evaluation of the work's substance. Kak's specific numerical analyses can be evaluated independently of any ideological company he may or may not keep. Either the numbers he identifies in the Vedas and Puranas correspond to astronomical constants at the precision he claims, or they do not. This is a testable question. It has not been systematically tested. The characterization has taken the place of the test. The same pattern applies to the Kramrish findings on temple encoding. Either the surviving temples conform to the specifications in the Vastu Shastras at the precision Kramrish documented, or they do not. This is testable. It has been partially tested by Meister and his colleagues. The pattern holds. Systematic large-scale testing of every documented Vastu prescription against every surviving temple has not been undertaken. The reason it has not been undertaken is that mainstream Indology treats the question as settled in the direction of loose correspondence rather than in the direction of technical fidelity. The finding that Kramrish documented is described in the literature. It is not at present the subject of active research programs that would either confirm or falsify its full extent. There is a difference between a finding being accepted and a finding being ignored. In this case, the finding has been ignored, which is not the same as having been overturned. There is one further observation about the pattern of academic response that has become impossible to ignore. When the same alternative history questions are raised in the popular press or on television, mainstream scholars are frequently willing to respond forcefully. When Graham Hancock's series Ancient Apocalypse aired on Netflix in 2022 and 2023, the Society for American Archaeology issued a formal public statement objecting to it. Individual archaeologists wrote extensive critical responses. The energy of the response was significant. What has not happened, in parallel, is a comparably energetic engagement with the specific technical claims underlying alternative readings of ancient texts. The public response engages with the popularization. The academic engagement with the underlying substance remains sparse. This asymmetry, high energy against the popular presentation, low energy against the substantive claim, is what the forensic viewer of these debates learns to identify. It is a marker of a field that treats itself as settled rather than as engaged in ongoing inquiry. The broader context in which all of this sits begins with the recognition that Indian civilization is not one thing. It is a stratigraphy, a set of layers deposited over an enormous span of time, each layer preserving something that the layer above did not fully erase. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between approximately 3,300 and 1300 BCE, produced cities, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dholavira, that were laid out on grid plans with standardized brick sizes, with sophisticated water management systems, with a script that has never been deciphered. When these cities were first excavated in the 1820s by James Lewis, and then more systematically by John Marshall in the 1920s, the discovery forced a revision of the entire chronology of Indian civilization. Before Marshall, the mainstream view held that Indian civilization began with the Aryan migration, sometime around 1500 BCE, and that everything before that was primitive. After Marshall, it became clear that a fully urban, technologically sophisticated civilization had existed in the Indian subcontinent for 2,000 years before the Aryans arrived, or, in some readings, before the Aryans emerged from within the existing population. The Indus civilization built no temples of the kind that would later dominate the Indian religious landscape. What they built were public bathing complexes. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro is the most famous, a stepped tank with waterproofed brick, dating to approximately 2500 BCE. They built granaries, they built assembly halls, but their religious practice, if it can be reconstructed at all, has to be reconstructed from seals, small square objects of steatite inscribed with the undeciphered script and with images of animals, of composite beings, and of what appears to be a horned figure seated in a yogic posture. This figure, on the seal now catalogued in the National Museum of India in New Delhi and often called the Pashupati seal, has been identified by some scholars as a proto-Shiva. By others, it has been identified as a hunter god, or as a symbol whose meaning cannot be recovered. The seal is small, approximately 3.5 centimeters on a side. It is one of thousands. The images on the seals include figures that are difficult to interpret in any framework. Beings with multiple faces, beings in tree canopies, beings with what appear to be composite animal features. The Indus religion, whatever it was, does not fit neatly into the framework of the later Vedic religion, but it does not entirely conflict with it either. There are hints, there are echoes, there is not enough evidence to draw a clear line. The layer above the Indus is the Vedic layer, associated with the Sanskrit-speaking peoples who composed the Rigveda, the Samaveda, the Yajurveda, and the Atharvaveda. The conventional dating for the composition of the Rigveda is between roughly 1500 and 1200 BCE, though the material claims to be far older, and some Indian scholars date it as early as 3100 BCE based on internal astronomical references. The Vedas do not describe the seven loka system in the systematic way the later Puranas do. The Vedas describe three worlds: earth, atmosphere, and heaven, the Triloka system. The elaboration to 7 upper realms and 7 lower realms comes later, in the layer above the Vedas, in the texts known as the Brahmanas, the Aranyakas, and the Upanishads, and reaches its full form in the Puranas. This raises an obvious question. If the 7 loka system is not in the earliest layer of Indian religious literature, but appears only in later layers, is it a genuine tradition, or is it a later elaboration? The mainstream Indological answer is that it is a later elaboration, that Vedic thought developed and became more systematized over time, and that the 7 loka system is the product of that development. The alternative reading, defended by Kak and others, is that the 7 loka system was always present in the tradition, but that the Vedas as we have them are hymns of praise and ritual, not systematic cosmological treatises, and that the systematic cosmology was preserved in an oral tradition that only got written down later, in the Puranas. Both readings are compatible with the surviving text. The temples come even later. The oldest surviving stone Hindu temples date to approximately the 4th century CE, the Gupta period. Before that, temples were built of wood and have not survived. But the templates for temple construction are older than the surviving temples. The Vastu Shastras, which contain the technical specifications, exist in manuscript copies dating to roughly the same period as the earlier stone temples, but they refer to themselves as recording much older knowledge. The Manasara, which is one of the most detailed Vastu texts, describes not only the proportions of the temple, but the ritual of its construction, the selection of the site, the measurement of the ground, the alignment with cardinal directions, the specific numerical ratios that must be observed in the placement of every element. The text is technical. Its instructions are the kind of instructions that a working architect could follow and did follow. The correspondence between what the Manasara specifies and what the Kailasa Temple, the Brihadiswara Temple, and other surviving temples display is Cramrish's central documented finding. The temples were built to spec, and the spec, encoded in the vimana, is the 7 loka structure with the specific closing at the 5th realm. There is another consideration. The Kailasa Temple at Ellora was carved from the top down. This is unusual as a construction method. Most stone architecture, whether ancient or modern, is built from the bottom up. Foundations, then walls, then roof. The Kailasa Temple was excavated from an existing basalt cliff by removing stone until the temple was left standing. To do this, the builders had to know, before they began, exactly what the finished temple would look like. There is no room for error. You cannot carve away stone and then decide you removed too much. Once removed, it is gone. The Kailasa Temple was, by any reasonable assessment, planned to a level of precision that most modern architects would find difficult to match. It was carved during the reign of Krishna the First, but the plan for such a temple, and the willingness to commit the enormous labour of excavating it, must have existed before Krishna the First. It was executed during his reign, but it was designed, in the sense of the fundamental structural plan, from a template that already existed. The template is described in the Vastu Shastras. The Vastu Shastras describe the 7 loka encoding. the cosmological context in which the Puranic system sits is worth pausing on. The Indian conception of time is not linear, it is cyclical. The Puranas describe cosmic cycles of enormous duration. A yuga is a period of thousands of years. 4 yugas make a Mahayuga. 1,000 Mahayugas make a kalpa, which is called a day of Brahma. A kalpa is 4,320,000,000 years. A day and a night of Brahma is twice that. 100 years of Brahma is Brahma's lifetime, at the end of which the entire cosmos, including Satyaloka itself, dissolves. These numbers are not vague. They are given as specific values in the Vishnu Purana, in the Bhagavata Purana, and in the Manusmriti. What is remarkable about them, from the standpoint of modern cosmology, is that the order of magnitude of a kalpa, 4.32 billion years, is within a factor of 3 of the current best estimate of the age of the Earth, which is approximately 4.54 billion years. This may be coincidence. It may be, as Kak has argued, the result of a preserved astronomical calculation. It is not conclusive of anything by itself. It is one of a number of numerical alignments in the Puranas that resist easy explanation as random symbolism. The Kailasa Temple stands within this framework. It was built at a moment in Indian history, the 8th century CE, when the great synthesis of Vedic, Puranic, and Tantric material was reaching its full form. The Rashtrakuta dynasty, which sponsored the temple, controlled a large portion of central and southern India. Krishna the First ruled from approximately 756 to 773 CE. His court was a centre of Sanskrit learning. The temple he sponsored was not a modest project. It was a statement, a physical embodiment of the cosmological claims that the Puranas make in text. To carve 7 levels into a monolith, to align each level with the appropriate deity, to encode the vimana with the specific ratios that the Vastu Shastras specify, and to do all of this at a scale that dwarfs almost any comparable ancient project, is not the behaviour of a culture that regarded the 7 loka system as loose metaphor. It is the behaviour of a culture that regarded the map as important enough to carve into a mountain. The people who did the carving are largely anonymous. The name of the architect of the Kailasa Temple is not preserved. We know only the name of the king who sponsored it, and the general period of its construction. The workers who spent decades removing 200,000 tons of stone from the cliff are unknown by name. The teachers who transmitted the Vastu specifications to the architect are unknown. What is preserved is the temple itself, and the text that specifies what a temple like it should encode. Between the two, the map of the 7 realms, with its specific instruction about the 5th, can be read. The scale of the Kailasa project bears further examination. The excavation was carried out entirely with iron chisels and hammers. There is no evidence of any powered tool, no evidence of any explosive, no evidence of any mechanical device beyond simple levers and ropes. The workers stood on the cliff, or on wooden scaffolding built into the cliff face as the cut proceeded downward, and they removed the stone piece by piece. The estimate of 200,000 tons is a modern reconstruction based on the volume of the pit and the density of Deccan basalt, which runs approximately 3,000 kilograms per cubic metre. The volume removed is estimated at roughly 85,000 cubic metres. If the work took, at the outer estimate, 20 years, that averages to roughly 12 tons of stone removed every day, for 7,300 days. If the work took 50 years, which is another estimate proposed by some archaeologists, the daily rate is still nearly 5 tons. This is a construction pace that would strain a modern quarrying operation. It was accomplished by workers using iron chisels. What the record does not preserve is how many workers were involved. The estimates range from a few hundred to several thousand at any given time. The temple itself, when finished, contained multiple named sub-shrines. There is a main sanctum housing a linga of Shiva. There is a Nandi Mandapa, a pavilion for the sacred bull. There are subsidiary shrines to the river goddesses Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati at the base. There are panels depicting the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, carved in continuous narrative sequence along the walls. There is a 2-story structure to the south known as the Lankeshwar Cave, and another set of galleries to the north. The Vimana Tower rises in a stepped pyramid form, with each tier decorated with sculptural niches and with the specific number of divisions and subdivisions specified in the Vastu texts. Kramrish documented that the number of horizontal mouldings in the base of a temple, the number of tiers in the vimana, and the ratio between the height of the sanctum and the height of the tower are all specified in the Manasara and in the Mayamata, another Vastu text. She measured a number of surviving temples and found that they conform to the specifications within a small margin of error. This is not the finding you would expect if the temples were built to loose religious specifications. It is the finding you would expect if they were built to a technical template. The Manasara itself has been translated and studied in detail. The most complete English translation is by Prasanna Kumar Acharya, published in the 1930s in a series of volumes under the general title Architecture of Manasara. Acharya was a Sanskrit scholar who worked on the Vastu texts as a lifetime project. His translation, while dated, remains the standard reference. The text specifies not only the proportions of the temple, but the ceremonial procedures, the selection of the site by the examination of soil and water, the orientation to the cardinal directions, the placement of a foundation deposit, the timing of the construction with respect to astronomical events. Every stage is specified, every stage is technical. The tone of the text is not devotional, it is procedural. It reads like an engineering manual, with the difference that it also specifies the cosmological meaning of each element. This coupling of engineering and cosmology is what Cranbrook identified as the central feature of Hindu temple architecture. The two are not separate. The temple is a machine of a kind for representing the cosmos. The machine is built to specification. The specification is public. It has been public since the Manasara was first written down. There are further temples that display the same pattern. The Brihadiswara temple at Thanjavur, built by Rajaraja I and completed in approximately 1010 CE, has a vimana that rises to approximately 66 meters, making it one of the tallest ancient temples in India. It was built of granite blocks, not of monolithic carved stone. The blocks were quarried, transported, and lifted into place. The engineering problem of building such a tower is formidable. The Chola inscriptions on the base of the temple record the names of the sculptors, the endowments made to support the temple's ongoing rituals, and the specific dimensions of every element. This is one of the best documented ancient temples anywhere in the world. The vimana of the Brihadiswara has 13 visible tiers, plus a capstone. The number 13 is not a random architectural choice. It reflects the specific proportional system of the Chola period Vastu tradition, which encoded the 7 cosmological realms plus additional subdivisions. The Lingaraj temple at Bhubaneswar in Odisha, dating to approximately the 11th century CE, follows a different regional style, the Kalinga style, characterized by its tall curvilinear tower rather than the stepped pyramid of the southern style, but encodes the same cosmological hierarchy in its structural divisions. The temple's tower rises to approximately 55 meters. Its base plan and elevation are specified in a regional Vastu tradition, documented in texts like the Shilpa Prakasha, which is dated to roughly the 9th to 11th century CE. The specific correspondence between the Vastu specifications and the surviving temples in Odisha has been documented by the art historian Michael Meister, who taught for many years at the University of Pennsylvania and who continued Cranbrook's tradition of technical analysis of Indian temple architecture. Meister's edited volumes on the Encyclopedia of Indian Temple Architecture provide detailed measurements of hundreds of temples. The pattern that Cranbrook identified in 1946 has been extended and refined by Meister and his colleagues across the last several decades. It has not been overturned. The temples conform to spec. The broader civilizational context includes the fact that the Puranic cosmology was not a private religious document. It was public. The Puranas were recited in public assemblies. The temples were built in public. The rituals were performed in public. If the seven-realm map is a description of anything real, it is not a hidden esoteric doctrine. It is what the culture, at its most public and monumental scale, was building and reciting into being. The Kailasa Temple was not hidden in a private grove. It is on a scale designed for spectacle. Krishna the First's decision to sponsor it was a political decision. He was making a statement to his subjects, to his rivals, and to future generations about what he believed to be true and worth committing to stone. The cosmology encoded in the temple was, at that moment, not fringe. It was official. This raises a further question that the alternative reading addresses. If the seven-realm map was public and official in the 8th century CE, and if it is preserved with structural fidelity in the Puranas that circulated through the following millennium, And if the same structure occurs in temples across regions and dynasties, why has the modern academic reading defaulted to metaphor? The alternative reading's answer is that the metaphor reading is a modern imposition, not a native interpretation. Traditional Indian commentators, Sridhara Swami in the 14th century, Vijayadvaya Tirtha in the 15th, and later commentators, treated the Puranic cosmology as description, not as metaphor. They debated the specific measurements, they debated the specific inhabitants, they debated the specific rules about the movement of souls. They did not, in the surviving commentaries, argue that the whole thing was symbolic. That reading enters the tradition late, with the encounter between Hindu thought and European philology in the 19th century, when Sanskrit scholars trained in the German idealist tradition began to interpret Indian religious texts through a symbolic and psychological framework borrowed from European hermeneutics. Under that framework, texts that had been read literally by their traditional custodians were reinterpreted as figurative. The reinterpretation was not neutral. It was a translation of Indian material into a European conceptual scheme, and the specific claim of the Puranas, that the fifth realm is the threshold beyond which return is not possible, was among the things that got translated away. The scholar who first pushed back systematically against this interpretive move was, ironically, not from within the alternative history community. He was a mainstream Indologist named Kapila Vatsyayan, who worked at the Indira Gandhi National Centre for the Arts in New Delhi from its founding in the 1980s until her death in 2020. Vatsyayan argued that the Sanskritic tradition had its own hermeneutic conventions and that reading Indian texts through European symbolic frameworks systematically distorted their meaning. Her position was academic. Her institutional base was central to Indian cultural scholarship. Her argument has not been refuted, though it has been debated. What she did not fully develop, but what her framework opens up, is the possibility that the traditional Sanskrit reading, literal, technical, geographically specific, is the more accurate reading of what the texts were originally intended to convey. The metaphorical reading may be the innovation, not the original. The cosmological context in which the Puranic system sits is worth pausing on. The Indian conception of time is not linear, it is cyclical. The Puranas describe cosmic cycles of enormous duration. A yuga is a period of thousands of years. 4 yugas make a mahayuga. 1,000 mahayugas make a kalpa, which is called a day of Brahma. A kalpa is 4,320,000,000 years. A day and a night of Brahma is twice that. 100 years of Brahma is Brahma's lifetime, at the end of which the entire cosmos, including Satyaloka itself, dissolves. These numbers are not vague. They are given as specific values in the Vishnu Purana, in the Bhagavata Purana, and in the Manusmriti. What is remarkable about them from the standpoint of modern cosmology is that the order of magnitude of a kalpa, 4.32 billion years, is within a factor of 3 of the current best estimate of the age of the Earth, which is approximately 4.54 billion years. This may be coincidence. It may be, as Kark has argued, the result of a preserved astronomical calculation. It is not conclusive of anything by itself. It is one of a number of numerical alignments in the Puranas that resist easy explanation as random symbolism. The individual yuga durations are also given specifically. The Krita Yuga, the first, is 1,728,000 years. The Treta Yuga is 1,296,000 years. The Dvapara Yuga is 864,000 years. The Kali Yuga, the current age, is 432,000 years long, and began, according to Puranic tradition, in the year that corresponds to 3102 BCE, the date given for the death of Krishna and the end of the Mahabharata war. This is a specific date. It is derivable from the internal Puranic chronology, and it is remarkable in one respect that has been repeatedly noted. The date 3102 BCE falls close to the beginning of urban civilization in the Indian subcontinent, which the mainstream archaeological chronology places at roughly 3300 BCE, with the beginning of the Indus mature phase. The two dates are within 200 years of each other. The Puranic tradition places the current cosmic age at a moment that corresponds, within the limits of ancient reckoning, to the beginning of the historical civilization. This may be another coincidence. It may not be. The alternative reading holds that the correspondence is meaningful, that the Puranas, in dating the Kali Yuga, are recording a real transition in the history of the region. The Kailasa Temple stands within this framework. It was built at a moment in Indian history in the 8th century CE, when the great synthesis of Vedic, Puranic and Tantric material was reaching its full form. The Rashtrakuta dynasty, which sponsored the temple, controlled a large portion of central and southern India. Krishna the First ruled from approximately 756 to 773 CE. His court was a centre of Sanskrit learning. The temple he sponsored was not a modest project. It was a statement, a physical embodiment of the cosmological claims that the Puranas make in text. To carve 7 levels into a monolith, to align each level with the appropriate deity, to encode the vimana with the specific ratios that the Vastu Shastras specify, and to do all of this at a scale that dwarfs almost any comparable ancient project, is not the behaviour of a culture that regarded the 7 loka system as loose metaphor. It is the behaviour of a culture that regarded the map as important enough to carve into a mountain. The Rashtrakuta court under Krishna the First included Sanskrit scholars, astronomers, and priests. The court poet Trivikrama Bhatta composed works in Sanskrit that are still extant. The astronomical traditions of the Rashtrakuta period continued the work of the earlier Gupta astronomers, Aryabhatta in the 5th century CE and Varahamihira in the 6th. Aryabhatta, in his work the Aryabhatiya, gave a value for pi accurate to 4 decimal places and estimated the circumference of the Earth at approximately 40,000 kilometres, remarkably close to the modern figure of about 40,075 kilometres at the equator. Varahamihira, in his encyclopedic work the Brihat Samhita, systematized astronomy, astrology, geography and Vastu together, treating them as related fields of a single technical tradition. This is worth pausing on. In the Sanskrit intellectual tradition, the field that specified how to build a temple was continuous with the field that specified the position of the planets. Both were parts of a single body of learning called Jyotisha, the science of light. The people who built the Kailasa Temple were not decorators. They were engineers whose engineering was continuous with astronomy. The cross-cultural parallels here are what turn the Indian case from an isolated finding into a pattern. The most direct parallel comes from Sumer, where the descent of the goddess Inanna into the underworld, recorded in a Sumerian text dated to approximately 2100 BCE, with copies in the British Museum and in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, describes a passage through 7 gates. At each gate, Inanna is required to remove one of her ornaments: her crown, her earrings, her necklace, her breastplate, her belt, her bracelets, and her robe. She arrives at the 7th gate stripped of everything. She reaches the throne of her sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, and she is judged. In the Sumerian text, Inanna does not return, until her father Enki sends 2 creatures to rescue her, and even then only on the condition that she leave a substitute in her place. The specific structure of the 7 gates, with a threshold beyond which normal return is not possible, mirrors the Puranic account almost exactly. The Sumerian version is older than the Puranic manuscripts by roughly 2,000 years, though the Puranic material claims to be older than its recording. The parallel is not general, it is specific. 7 regions, a threshold, a rule about return. The Sumerian text of Inanna's descent survives in multiple tablet copies from the Third Dynasty period, roughly 2100 to 2000 BCE, and from the later Old Babylonian period. The most complete version was reconstructed by the Sumerologist Samuel Noah Kramer, who spent much of his career at the University of Pennsylvania and who was among the founders of modern Sumerology. Kramer's reconstruction, first published in the 1940s and refined across the following decades, established the text as one of the fundamental documents of Mesopotamian religion. The Akkadian version, which is a somewhat different composition also concerning Inanna's counterpart Ishtar, is preserved in tablets from the library of Ashurbanipal in the British Museum, dating to the 7th century BCE. Both versions describe the same 7-gate structure. In the Akkadian version, when Ishtar descends into the underworld, all reproduction on Earth ceases. No children are conceived, no animals mate, no crops grow. The removal of the goddess from the world of the living produces a specific cosmological effect that has to be reversed by intervention. The Sumerian and Akkadian versions differ in detail but agree on the essential structure. The threshold at the 7th gate is not a soft threshold. It is hard. Passage across it is one way unless external intervention is applied. The parallel to the Puranic 5th realm rule is not just in the number 7, which is where the diffusion argument focuses. It is in the mechanism. Both texts describe a specific point in a stratified series of regions beyond which return requires either external intervention or a substitution or is not possible at all. The Puranic system places the threshold at the fifth of 7 upper realms, Janaloka. The Sumerian system places it at the 7th of 7 gates. The Egyptian system places it at the Hall of Mayat at a variable position in the sequence of the Duat's gates. The Zoroastrian system places it at the Chinvat Bridge, a single threshold before the tiered levels of paradise. The specific position varies. The specific mechanism does not. In each case, a soul or a being that reaches the threshold either passes through and does not return, or is held, or is judged, and either passes onward or is consumed. The Egyptian parallel is in the Papyrus of Ani, one of the manuscript copies of the Book of the Dead, dating to approximately 1300 BCE, held in the British Museum. In the Egyptian system, the deceased soul passes through the Duat, the underworld, and encounters a series of gates. At each gate, the soul must know the name of the gate and the name of its guardian. The exact number of gates varies in different manuscripts. Some list 7, some list 12, some list 21. But the 7-gate structure is one of the standard traditions. At the culminating stage, the soul reaches the Hall of Ma'at, where the heart is weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart is lighter, the soul passes onward into the fields of Aru, from which return to earthly life is not described. If the heart is heavier, the soul is consumed by Amit and ceases. The gate at which the weighing takes place, the threshold of return, sits at a specific stage in the passage. It is not the first gate, it is not the last. It is a middle gate. The specific parallel to the Puranic fifth realm is not exact. The Egyptian text places the threshold differently, but the underlying structure is the same. 7 or more gates, a threshold, a rule about return. The Papyrus of Ani itself is worth a brief description. It was acquired by the British Museum from the Egyptologist E. A. Wallace Budge in 1888. Budge purchased it in Egypt under circumstances that have been the subject of subsequent controversy. The papyrus is approximately 23 metres long, one of the longest surviving copies of the Book of the Dead. It was made for a scribe named Ani, whose titles included Royal Scribe of the Divine, offerings. The text on the papyrus is accompanied by extensive illustrations, including a famous depiction of the weighing of Ani's heart, with the god Anubis manipulating the scales, the ibis-headed Thoth recording the result, and the composite beast Amit waiting to devour the heart if it fails the test. The scene has been reproduced in essentially every modern book on Egyptian religion. Budge's translation, published in 1901 and revised repeatedly, remains the most widely cited version, though modern Egyptologists have refined many of Budge's readings. There is a further parallel, in the Zoroastrian tradition, in the text called the Bunda-Hishan, which was compiled in Middle Persian, in roughly the 9th century CE, but preserves material from much earlier. The Bunda-Hishan describes the soul's passage after death across the Chinvat Bridge, which either broadens for the righteous, allowing them to cross into paradise, or narrows for the wicked, causing them to fall into the underworld. The Chinvat Bridge is a single threshold, but the paradise beyond it is described in tiered levels: Humata, Huukta, Huvarashta, and Anagra Rausha, the endless lights. The specific number of levels varies in different Zoroastrian sources, but the tiered structure and the one-way threshold are consistent with the Puranic and Egyptian and Sumerian patterns. A further and often overlooked parallel comes from the Book of Enoch, an Ethiopian Orthodox canonical text preserved in Ge'ez, but originally composed in Aramaic and Hebrew fragments, of which have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The relevant passages, in the section known as the Book of the Watchers, describe Enoch being taken up through a series of heavens and shown the regions of the cosmos. He passes through gates. He's shown storerooms of the winds. He is shown the prisons of the fallen angels. He reaches a threshold beyond which he is told he cannot proceed. The Book of Enoch was widely read in the intertestamental period and was cited by New Testament writers. It fell out of the Western Christian canon but was preserved in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The tiered heaven structure it describes, with a threshold beyond which a living being is not permitted to proceed, is another instance of the same pattern. The composition dates to roughly the 3rd to 1st century BCE for the earliest layers. The parallel is not exact. The parallel is structural. The conventional explanation for these parallels is diffusion. Indian, Persian, Egyptian, and Sumerian cultures were in contact, at various periods, through various trade routes, through various political relationships. Ideas moved between them. The seven-realm cosmology could have spread from one origin to the others. This is the standard mainstream explanation, and it is not implausible. The Silk Road existed. The Persian Achaemenid Empire at its height in the 6th to 4th centuries BCE included parts of northern India and had contact with Egypt. Buddhist missions went from India into the Hellenistic world and into Persia. There is no shortage of channels through which the idea could have moved. The problem with the diffusion explanation is not that the channels did not exist. The problem is that the earliest datable versions of the seven-realm cosmology, the Sumerian, from roughly 2100 BCE, predate the channels of diffusion by more than 1,000 years. The Sumerian civilization was not in significant contact with Egypt in 2100 BCE. It was certainly not in contact with Vedic India, which did not yet exist in the form that would produce the Puranas. If the cosmology diffused, it must have diffused earlier than the surviving text document, or it must have originated independently in each of these cultures in a form specific enough that the parallels are not coincidental. Or, as the alternative reading suggests, it must have come from a source that was common to all of them at a period before the historical record begins. The counter-case to the alternative reading is worth stating fully. The most serious objection is that the correspondence between the seven realm systems in different cultures is exactly the kind of correspondence you would expect from a general human tendency to organize spiritual concepts hierarchically and to use small round numbers for the levels. 7 is a common number in many cultures because it corresponds to the number of visible planets: the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, which was observed by every ancient astronomy from Mesopotamia to China. If 7 is a convenient number because it is the number of visible planets, then the appearance of 7-tier cosmologies across cultures is not surprising and does not require any special explanation. The specific claim of a threshold at the middle level, the 5th realm rule, could similarly be explained as a general human intuition. Any hierarchical system will have a middle. Any middle can be given a special status. The parallels between the Puranic, Sumerian, Egyptian, and Zoroastrian systems could be produced by nothing more than the shared human experience of the sky, and the shared human tendency to organize spiritual concepts hierarchically. This is a serious objection. It has been made in variations by scholars who study comparative religion carefully, by Wendy Doniger, by Mircea Eliade in his broader work on the pattern of the axis mundi, by Georges Dumézil in his tripartite functional analysis of Indo-European religion. Dumézil in particular argued that Indo-European cultures share deep structural features because they share a common cultural ancestry, not because they preserve a common cosmology from before the historical record. Under this reading, the parallel between the Puranic and the Zoroastrian systems is explained by their shared Indo-Iranian origin. The two traditions descend from a common Proto-Indo-Iranian religion, which explains their similarities without requiring any deeper cosmology. The Sumerian and Egyptian cases on this reading are unrelated to the Indo-Iranian pattern and are separate instances of the general human tendency towards sevenfold hierarchies. The response to this objection is not that it is wrong. The response is that it is incomplete. The general human tendency explanation accounts for the presence of sevenfold structures. It does not account for the specific correspondence in the rule about return. The Puranic text does not say that the 5th realm is special in some general way. It says specifically that the door to the cycle of birth and death closes at the 5th realm and does not reopen. The Sumerian text does not say that the 7th gate is special in some general way. It says specifically that Inanna cannot return until a substitute is provided. The Egyptian text does not say that the middle gate is special in some general way. It says specifically that the weighing of the heart is the point after which the soul either passes onward or ceases. The correspondence is not just in the number 7, it is in the specific mechanism. Something happens at the threshold. The traveller does not simply continue. The traveller is transformed, or held, or judged, and then either passes through irreversibly or ceases. This is a specific structural claim, not a general one. And the diffusion explanation, to fully account for it, has to explain why the specific mechanism recurs, not just the number. The current state of the debate remains genuinely unresolved. The consequence, if the alternative reading is substantially correct, is that Indian cosmology, and by extension the cosmologies of Sumer, Egypt and Persia, would not be describing metaphorical states of the soul. They would be describing an actual structure, a stratified series of regions, with rules about the movement of consciousness between them, and a specific threshold beyond which the movement is one way. The temples that encode this structure, the Kailasa Temple, the Brihadiswara Temple, the Lingaraj Temple, would not be beautiful teaching devices. They would be maps. The people who built them would have believed the map to be accurate, in a sense stronger than metaphor. The question of whether the map is in fact accurate is a separate question. But the question of whether the ancient authors of the Puranas and the ancient builders of the temples meant it to be read as a map rather than as a metaphor is answerable from the texts themselves, and the texts say what they say. The Kailasa Temple is in the village of Ellora in the state of Maharashtra in India. It has been there since it was carved in the 8th century CE. The Vishnu Purana has been in circulation since approximately the same period, with older material embedded in it. The Bhagavata Purana has been in circulation in its current form since roughly the 9th or 10th century CE. The text of the 5th chapter of the 2nd book of the Vishnu Purana describes 7 realms above the earth, and it says that the 5th of those realms, Janaloka, is the threshold. Stella Kramrisch published her documentation of the encoding in 1946. Her books are still in print. Subhash Kak has published his numerical analyses in peer-reviewed journals across the last 30 years. What Krishna the First's builders carved into the basalt cliff of Ellora between roughly 756 and 773, and what the Puranic authors preserved in text, and what a small number of scholars have argued should be read as description rather than as decoration, remains in place. The temple is still standing, the books are still in print. The question of what the 5th realm is, and what happens there, and why the ancient authors said the door closes at that point and does not reopen, is still open. It has been open since the temple was carved. It is still open now.